So, here's the story of how I unknowingly walked into a Mafia dinner, stayed for 2 hours, and somehow made it out alive without realizing what had happened until later. It all started because of my terrible sense of direction. I was in a city I'd never been to before for a work trip, and after a long day of meetings, I decided to treat myself to a nice dinner. I found this Italian restaurant online with great reviews, authentic food, cozy atmosphere, the whole deal. I thought, perfect, just what I need. I put the address into Google Maps and started walking. It was one of those charming, old-school neighborhoods with cobblestone streets and dimly lit buildings. I found the restaurant, or at least what I thought was the restaurant, tucked into a quiet corner with no big sign, just a small gold plaque on the door that said La Famiglia. It looked exclusive, but I figured it was one of those hidden gems. When I walked in, the place was different from what I expected. It wasn't bustling like the reviews said. Instead, it was dimly lit, with heavy curtains on the windows and only a few tables. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and expensive cologne. Everyone was dressed way nicer than I was, suits, ties, dresses, and they all turned to look at me the second I walked in. Table for one? I said, suddenly feeling very underdressed in my jeans and hoodie. The host, a tall guy with slicked back hair and a face that looked like it had seen a few fights, raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Instead, he just nodded and led me to a small table in the corner. I sat down, trying not to make eye contact with anyone, and started looking at the menu. Except, there was no menu. Just a single sheet of paper with no prices, listing things like Nana's Special and the boss's favorite. Weird, but I figured it was one of those places where the chef decides what you eat. A waiter came over, another guy in a suit, with a scar running down his cheek, and asked, "What'll it be?" I'll have the, Nana's Specials," I said, feeling like I was doing something wrong. He nodded and walked away without writing anything down. As I waited, I started noticing things, like how no one else in the restaurant was eating. They were just sitting around these big tables, talking in low voices, and occasionally glancing at me. At one point, a guy at the table closest to me leaned over and whispered something to the host, who then looked directly at me. My stomach dropped. Okay, maybe this isn't the right place, I thought. But before I could decide whether to leave, my food arrived. And let me tell you, it was amazing. Like, life-changing. Homemade pasta, rich sauce, perfectly cooked meatballs. I was so focused on the food that I almost forgot how uncomfortable the whole vibe was. Almost. About halfway through my meal, the front door opened, and this older guy walked in. He was short but carried himself like he owned the place. Everyone in the room stood up. Everyone. I had no idea what was happening, so I just kind of froze, fork halfway to my mouth. The guy scanned the room, his eyes eventually landing on me. He frowned, then walked over to my table. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice calm but somehow terrifying. Before I could answer, the host said, "Don't worry, boss. He's just a walk-in." The boss stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Enjoy your meal," he said, before heading to the largest table in the room. Everyone sat back down, and the conversation picked up again, but I couldn't focus. My heart was racing. Who the hell were these people? Then it hit me. This isn't a restaurant. This is a private event. I wanted to leave, but I didn't know how to do it without drawing attention to myself. So I just kept eating, trying to act normal while my brain screamed, "You're sitting in a room full of mobsters." At one point, a guy from another table came over and sat down across from me. "You like the food?" he asked, smiling in a way that wasn't comforting at all. "Yeah, it's great," I said, trying not to sound as nervous as I felt. He nodded. "Good. We don't usually get new faces here. How'd you find the place?" Google's?" I said, instantly regretting it. The guy laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "Google, huh? That's funny." He leaned in closer. "You're not a cop, are you?" "No," I said way too quickly. "I'm just here for work. I didn't even know this was, a private thing." He stared at me for a second, then slapped the table and laughed again. "Relax, kid. I'm just messing with you." But the way he said it didn't feel like a joke. Eventually, I finished my meal, and the host came over with a check. It was blank. Just a slip of paper with the word grazie written on it. I didn't know what to do, so I pulled out a $50 bill and handed it to him. He nodded, pocketed it, and said, "Have a good night." I walked out of there so fast, I probably broke a personal speed record. When I got back to my hotel, I Googled La Famiglia again, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Turns out, the restaurant I'd been looking for was 2 blocks away, and La Famiglia wasn't a restaurant at all. It was the unofficial meeting spot for one of the city's most notorious crime families. So yeah, that's the story of how I accidentally crashed a mafia dinner, ate the best pasta of my life, and somehow didn't end up in a river. And now every time I see a guy in a suit, I get a little nervous.